Okay, today in class we worked on 7.6, which was renaming fractions and mixed numbers. Now 7.1 through 7.5 focused on adding and subtracting fractions. We know when we're adding and subtracting a fraction, the first thing we have to do is look at the denominator and make sure that the denominator is the same, and then all we do is add that numerator across or subtract that numerator across. Really, really simple. Well, the lesson we learned today is a little bit more complex, and the reason why we're doing this is when we move on tomorrow, we're going to be adding and subtracting mixed numbers, and we're going to have to change those mixed numbers into improper fractions, or fractions greater than 1, and then back to mixed numbers. So we have to learn this process first before we can do our next step. Now, here's a fraction, and this fraction is greater than 1, or it's called an improper fraction, which means our numerator, our number on top, is greater than our number on bottom. Now, what we want to do is change this into a mixed number. A mixed number means I want to know how many wholes I have, and then that little part that I have left. Remember, fractions represent parts of a whole. So in this case, because my numerator on top is larger than my denominator on bottom, I have lots of wholes, and then I have a part. I need to represent this as my wholes and my parts. So, I can do this two different ways. One way that I can do this is to pull out the wholes that I have in this fraction. Now, we know that a whole is represented by the numerator and denominator being the same. In this case, since our denominator is 4, one whole is equal to 4/4. So now I have to see how many 4/4 I can pull out of this fraction in order to make 11/4. So if I have 4/4, then I have a 4 right here, and I want to add my numerators up to 11. I can add another whole, which is represented by 4/4. And now I'm going to add my numerators, and I have 4 plus 4, and that's 8. Now, can I add another 4 to that? I cannot. So I think, okay, 4 plus 4 is 8. 8 plus what gives me 11? Well, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I need 3 more. I then have to represent all of these different fractions in a mixed number. Now, 4/4, I just said represents 1. 4/4 represents another whole. And then I have my piece left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my whole here and my whole here, and I'm going to add those together. 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. And then what I have left is my 3/4. So 11/4 basically means I have 2 wholes and I have 3/4 left over. Now, I can change this into a mixed number this way. I can also take my 11/4 and change it into a mixed number a different way. I can divide in order to change my fraction into a mixed number. So I'm going to take my denominator of 4 and put my 11 inside my house, and now I'm going to divide. So I have to think, okay, how many times does 4 go into 11? 2 times. 4 times 2 is 8. I subtract, and I'm left with a remainder of 3. This means that within 11 there are 2 wholes and 3 left over. I can turn this information now into my mixed number. My 2, my quotient, represents my whole. My remainder represents what's left of my part, which is 3. That's going to be my numerator. And my denominator is my divisor, or the same as the denominator I started with. I can change my my improper fractions into mixed numbers two ways. I can pull apart my improper fraction into my wholes, count up my wholes, add them together, and then put what's left. Or I can divide. How many times does 4 go into 11? Well, it goes in 2 whole times, and then there's 3 pieces left of that whole. Let's take a look at another one. I have 17/5 here, so I'm going to pull out my wholes first. I'm going to say, okay, I know that I can at least get one whole, which would represent 5/5 in this case. My wholes are going to change based on my denominators. So 5/5 is a whole, and I need to get to 17. So 5 plus what gives me 17? Well, I can add 5 more. I know that 5 times 2 is 10. I know that 5 times 3 is 15. So now I'm at 5, 10, 15. I can't add 5 more. That would give me too much. So I have to think, okay, 15 plus what gives me 17? 2. I'm going to then rewrite this 5/5 is equal to a whole, 5/5 is equal to a whole, 5/5 is equal to a whole. So I have 3 wholes and 2/5 left over. Now I can also divide like I did before, and I can have my 5 on the outside as my divisor, my 17 as my dividend, and now I'm going to divide. How many times does 5 go into 17? It goes in 3 whole times. Place my 15 down here and subtract, and I'm left with 2 parts. So I can now represent this as my mixed number as well. I have 3 wholes. My quotient becomes my whole number, and I have 2 parts left over, which is my numerator, out of a total of 5 parts, my divisor. Alright, so this is what happens when I take a fraction greater than 1, or an improper fraction, and turn it into a mixed number. Now I'm going to have cases where I have to do the opposite. I'm going to have a mixed number, and I'm going to have to turn that mixed number into an improper fraction. So I have to work backwards. I'm going to figure out what a whole is equal to in this case. Well, my fraction shows me that I have a denominator of 4. And my whole number says you have 2 wholes. So 1 whole is equal to 4/4, and I have 2 of them. I need another 4/4. And then I need to add the fraction. And all I'm going to do in order to figure out what my fraction greater than 1 is add all my numerators up. My denominator stays the same. 4 plus 4 is 8, plus 3 more is 11. Now I can do this a different way as well. Because what I basically did here is say, okay, what's 4 times 2, and then I added 8 more because I had 2 wholes. That's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to take my mixed number, and my first step is going to be to multiply. So I'm going to think, okay, 4 times 2, or 2 times 4, is equal to 8. My second step is to add. I need to add 3 more to my 8. So my first step is to multiply my whole number times my denominator, and my second step is to take that product, which was 8, and add my numerator. So 8 plus 3 is equal to 11. And in all of these cases, my denominator is going to stay the same. So since my denominator is 4, it stays as 4. So step number 1 was to multiply my whole number times my denominator, and step number 2 was to add my numerator to that product. Okay, so these are 2 separate ways that we can change a mixed number to a fraction. Let's take a look at one more. I can start by thinking, okay, how many wholes do I have, and what is a whole equal to? Well, in this case, since my denominator is 3, a whole is equal to 3 over 3. And how many wholes do I have? I have to look at my whole number, and it says I have 5 of them. So I have to write 5 of these. That represents all of my wholes, and then this represents my part. Now when I add all this up, 3, 6, 9, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, plus 1 more is 16. And my denominator stays the same. Now, I can do this again with my 2 steps. I can start with multiplication. So 5 times 3 is 15. And then I add my numerator to my 15. So 15 plus 1 more is equal to 16. That 16 is now my numerator, and my denominator stays the same. So those are our 2 different steps that we're going to work with today. We have to change our improper fractions to our mixed numbers, and our mixed numbers back to improper fractions. Alright, good luck, and this is a skill that we really need to master so that we can move on to our next step of adding and subtracting mixed numbers.